Welcome to Ararat-Eskijian Museum, and as we're progressing every few 2 weeks lectures, of course each lecture is about different subject about our history. My name is Gregory Ketabgian, and I'm very honored to have Dr. Ketabgian today, who will be honoring about his book, and I've been hearing about it for the last 10 years maybe. Finally it came to its conclusion. I read the book and I highly recommend it. It brought me a lot of memories of my childhood. I was raised in a parochial school. My nuns were orphans themselves, so we had no critical thinking. But through Dr. Ketabgian's books, it brought me a lot of good memories of my childhood. And a lot of the items that there I used. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to bring to your attention that our next event is on June the 4th. It's a Friday because the speaker is coming to town from Boston. It's about the Smyrna. And one of the individuals who took upon himself to save many Armenians, Assyrians, and Greeks, Lou Uranek, who is an investigative reporter for the Boston Globe and who's also a journalist professor at Boston University. Professor Ketabgian was kind enough to refer him to me, and we are very happy to host him on Friday, June the 4th at 7 o'clock in the Sheen Chapel. All our lectures are done on Fridays, on Sundays at 4 o'clock. But sometimes the speakers are in town and we have to take advantage of the situation. We will have on June 14, we don't have the final flyer yet, the city of the Holy Cross Providence Hospital, Dr. Melkonian, Susie Melkonian, who's an oncologist and hematologist, has partnered, or the entire cancer center of the Presbyterian, the hospital has partnered with the City of Hope, and they would like to do a panel discussion with 4 to 6 oncologists, hematologists, surgeons about prevention of cancer. And that's going to take place on June 14th, Sunday at 4 o'clock in the museum. I have flyers, set the date, but I do not have the actual flyer of the event or who the speakers will be. We just got it finalized on Friday. And then we're going to take a month off, or 2 if we can, and then go back again in September. Briefly about Dr. Ketabgian. Most of you are familiar with him. He's been your doctor, or you've met him in the church. He is an open encyclopedia with the stories that he's come across with his patients, and his book gives us a tremendous amount of information about his father's memoirs, his childhood. As we children are survivors, the children, we carry the trauma that our parents went through, and I think he's done a beautiful job in portraying in his book, as well as giving us about his experiences in the United States. Just in honor of his father, I would like to invite one of our own, Ararat-Eskijian, who is a coordinator activities at the Ararat Home. She is a very gifted lady from Armenia who does a lot of beautiful poetry and plays for our elders, and she was very nice enough to accept my offer to come and do a poetry in Armenian of Siamanto, which I passed you the English version to you. And then afterwards, Dr. Ketabgian will take the podium. Susanna, please.
That she's wearing is made by our residents of Ararat Home in the assisted living. They made the dress so that every event she has to dress up. So this is done by our elders.
եւ արցունքներն իրենց կապույտ, աչքերու մեջ խեղտելով, մոխրադաշտի վրա, ուր հայ կյանքը դեռ կմեռներ, այսպես պատմեց մեր սարսափին, ականատես գերմանուհին։ Այս անպատմելի պատմությունը, որ ձեզ կնեմ, ես իմ անգութ աչքերովս այս մարդկային, իմ անվտանգ տնակիս գեհենադիր լուսամուտեն, ակրաներս կրճատելով, զայրութես զարհուրելի, այս աչքերովս անգութորեն մարդկային ես տեսա, մոխրակույտի վերացված, Պարտեզը քաղաքին մեջ էր, դիակները դիզված էին միջև կատարը ծառերուն, և ջուրերեն, աղբյուրներեն, առուներեն ու ճամփեն, ձեր այրունին կարկաչուն, ըմբոստաձայն, դեռականջիս իր վրեժն էր ահավասիկ, որ կխոսի։ Օ, չսոսկակ, եկան պատմելի պատմությունս ձեզ պատմեմ, թող մարդերը հասկանան մարդու ոճիրը մարդուն դեմ, մարդուն չարիքը մարդուն դեմ, թող աշխարհիս բոլոր սրտերն իմանան, այդ մահաշուչ առավոտը կիրակի էր, դիակներու վրա ծագող դեռ առաջին կիրակին, երբ ես սենյակիս մեջ իրիկ ունեն մինչև արշալույս, դաշնահար աղջկան հոգեբարքին վրա ծռած, արցունքներովս անոր մահը կթրջեի։ Հանկարծ հեռուեն սև խուժոնը անասնական, 20 հարսնել են իրենց հետ մոլեգնորեն մտրակելով, շուակորեն երկելով, այգի մեջ կանգնեցան, և կիսամեր խեղճ աղջիկն իր խշտերակին վրա լքած, դժոխկահայաց պատուհանիս պատշգամբին մոտեցա, այգի մեջ սև խուժան անտարացավ, վայրենի մահարսներին պետք է պարեք որոտած, պետք է պարեք, երբ մեր թմբուկը հնչե, և մտրակներն սկսեցին մահակորոտ հայքիներուն, մարմիններուն վրա կատաղությամբ մշարաչել, 20 հարսները ձեռք-ձեռքի իրենց շուրջ բարնը սկսեցին, աչուններեն իրենց արցունքը վերքերու պես կհոսեր, ահա ես որ չափ նախանձեցա իմ դրացի վիրավորիս, որովհետև լսեցի, որ հեռնդանով մահանդարդ, տիեզերքեն անիծել են խեղճ հայուհին գեղադեմ, իր տատրակի շուշն օգում դեմ աստղեր թևեր տովավ։ Ունայնորեն կրուպներես ամբոխին դեմ շարաչեցի, պետք է պարեք, կորնար խուժանը մոլեգին, մինչև ձեր մահ պետք է պարեք, դուք անհավատ գեղեցիկներ, կուրծքներդ բաց պետք է պարեք, մեր ժպտալով և անտրտունջ, հոգնությունը ձեզ համար չէ, ոչ ալամոթը ձեզ համար, ստրուկներեք պետք է պարեք, և մերկադեմ և հոլանի, մինչև ձեր մահ պետք է պարեք, պակշոտորեն ծոպությամբ մեր աչկերը ծարապ են ձեր ձևերուն ու ձեր մահվան, 20 հարսներուն գեղադեմ, գետին ինգան պարտասած, ոտքի ելեք գորացին, մեր սուրերին նոցերու պես շարժելով, հետո մեկը սափորով քարով բերավ խուժանին, Ո մարդկային արդարություն, թող ես թքնեմ քո ճակատին, 20 հարսներուն շտապով այդ հեղուկով օծեցին, պետք է պարեք որոտած, հավասիկ ձեզի բուրմունքմը, որ արաբին իսկ չունի, հետո ջախով մը բռնեկեցին մեր մարմինները հարսներուն Եվ ածխացած իրակները պարին մեջ դեպի մահը գլորեցան։ Զարհուրեն քեզ պատուհանին փեղ կփոթրիկ մպես փակվեղ։ Իմ մենավոր մերյալիս մոտենալով հարցուցի, ինչպես փորել այս աչքերը, ինչպես փորել, ըսե ինձ։
After that, everything is going to be anticlimactic. I don't know what I can say. I think it's quite an emotional statement of what has taken place. Of course, the poetry itself indicates what we have actually lost. During the genocide, of course, Siamanto composed this after the Adana massacre, which took place in 1909, and he got the information actually from letters by Mr. Balakian's grand uncle, who was a physician, who had gone to Adana to take care of the wounded living, and wrote letters to Siamanto. And that's where the material for this composition came up. It also indicates that what we have lost, actually, the catastrophe was so great that not only 50 years, actually 100 years since the genocide, we have had a hard time to recover. I think that we were poised to have another golden age of literature and art. Unfortunately, that was denied to us. Next, we're going to talk about my book, which Maggie suggested has taken me about 10 years to get it together, but it's all in bits and pieces, because it takes, I found out, a village or a family and a friend's village to write a book. My father was born in Kayseri, Syria, and was forced into the Syrian desert and to perish, of course. But he lost 2 members of his family and 10 members out of the total extended family of Ketabgians. And once in a while he would tell us of these stories of what he had gone through, especially when he had high fever or delirious, but otherwise wouldn't talk too much about it. Then as he got older, I was concerned that we were going to lose this information. So I asked him to write it down in a chronological order, and he said he feels too emotional and that he cannot do it because he relives these events. Fortunately, he agreed to tape it as if he was telling the story to other members. After he passed away, my mother gave us, I think, 6 or 8 cassettes of his dictations, and my sister Shake and her husband Garbis and her son Gary Bolipjians translated and digitized his memoirs from Armenian into English. So part of the book that you see where I used italicized font was their translation in bits and pieces. trying to make it more palatable, I've put in some of my childhood experiences, trying to come up with something maybe funny that happened to us, or some mischief that we did with my two other cousins. One of them was sitting in the back there smiling at me, Dr. Ketabgian, and trying to liven up things and to help people to understand that life has to go on, of course. In addition, my father was interviewed by the graduate student from UCLA, Dr. Ketabgian's oral history project, and we had that available, so I translated and have put that in parts where it adds additional points to what he has dictated. In addition, of course, we have some stories that it doesn't appear, but what he had told us, that's in our memory. So I want to thank, of course, translators who are sitting here and on the left. In addition, I want to thank Maggie Gorshin, who has, when she found out that my wife and I were writing our memoirs, would ask us each time she saw us, well, is the book finished? And of course, it took longer than we thought it would. In addition, I want to thank, of course, Dr. Ketabgian, who read one of the first drafts. I asked him to correct any historical errors. Of course, he goes through and starts correcting sentence structure and punctuation. He said, that's what I do all the time. So I thank him for that. In addition, I want to thank our good friend Gail Tager, who is sitting here with Alice, who has compared our genocide to the Holocaust. And after reading it, she has said it's a miracle you guys are alive. So I get emotional. And that's part of the book also, that getting emotional created some of the poetry. So you are stuck with it whether you like it or not. It's not great poetry, but it tries to make points. Excuse me. There are, of course, other people. We have talked to them about the book and have made other suggestions. I put it in the acknowledgement. But I shouldn't forget, of course, my wife with her good cooking, and repeatedly reading the book has corrected a lot of the English in it, although there are still some problems. And I want to thank especially my daughter Lena, who helped me with the front cover. There it is, you know, and I think it turned out pretty good. What I wanted to do next is to anticipate what questions you might have. So I'm going to try to answer them before you ask them. This is a new approach, modern approach. While we're talking about it, I just wanted to keep looking at this mountain, Argeos, or Ergios now it's called, the mountain that is sort of dominates Kayseri, and on its shores would be Talas, where they used to go in the summer, where it was much cooler. So the question is, why another book on the genocide? We have so many already, especially this year with present centennial number of other memoirs have come through. Well, we all have to do our part to continue our history, family history, and we have to have it in the detail that we have. Each one is slightly different. And however, having talked to both Dr. Ararat-Eskijian and Stephen Smith of Shoah Foundation, they both definitely agreed that a book like this should be written by everybody and published, because each one in detail supports the previous one made, especially in the face of denial, where you have a large number of people, say, from region comes up and gives you the same thing up to the same date, time of day, and where they were sent and what happened to them, that really gives you this whole documentation, because otherwise the deniers are saying, well, we don't want to listen to these old men and women crying all the time. Well, I know I'm emotional. I think the poetry did it, actually. Well, there was a recent article written that if somebody's going to give a talk, they do better if they are anxious and stressed instead of calm. It was in the Wall Street Journal just this weekend. Okay, that's supposed to be a joke. In addition, there are a number of things that my dad mentions. First of all, there aren't that many memoirs that I could find of the Kayseri or Kayseri deportations. One of the details that he brings up that I don't think I've read it anywhere is that Jamal Pasha came to Kayseri and everybody was asked to come to the center of town because a big personnel was going to talk. This was right after the war was announced with Allies. And his announcement was that a jihad was announced or proclaimed against all Christians. And my father says the face of all the Armenians turned into stone, because that included them. Then in addition, why call the book Kayseri instead of Kayseri? Of course, I would love to have called it Kayseri, but I thought that if it is going to have any exposure in non-Armenian circles, I think that Kayseri would be more appropriate and more easily recognized. Then the journey of 100 years. Why call it that? Of course, it has taken 100 years. Actually, it was, I had never thought about that until Gail had asked me. She said, how far is it from Kayseri to Derzor? Anybody guess how many miles? I looked it up on Google. Of course, the highways are now shorter than they used to be, and of course they were sent in roundabout ways. And someplace they went and came back 3 times before they entered Derzor. It's something like 960 miles, almost 1,000 miles. But it took them more than 2 years for my father to get to Derzor from Kayseri. Actually, that's what saved them, because they found out that other people who saw the killings outside Derzor, they survived and came back. They said, try not to go if you can help it, because everybody that goes there is being slaughtered. So, but my father considered life as a journey, and his favorite poem was, of course, Ashok Jivan's Bukan Gertan, They Come and Go. And I try to translate it, although I have to admit the English language is not do justice to the Armenian poem, similar to what the reciter did, because the Armenian words somehow fit and tell you more than what you can in English, although I assume it depends on our background also. So how were they saved? Basically, from random good deeds of strangers, whether they were Armenians, Turks, or Arabs, by money, because they were able to get some money sent to them, because my dad's grandmother had married a Catholic after her first husband had died, and initially the Catholics were not deported, so she could wire them money. And amazingly, the Turks who worked at these telegraph offices which handled the money, they didn't pocket it. They actually announced in the camp that Gregory Ketabgian come and there is a message for you. He goes and says, guess what? Your grandmother sent you 20 gold pieces, and here it is. Which is amazing. Then it also helped to make friends. They made friends with all the Turkish commanders or gendarmes. So they were good to them. At the end, their profession helped them because the Turks were willing to take in professionals into their zone instead of deporting further and into the killing field. So all of these worked, but basically involved a delay, and by then I think the major killing had stopped by the time they got to their zone. Losing faith in God. Now, there are some areas where my father says, where are you, God? Where have you been? Now, this is a common refrain in genocide memoirs, and they were waiting for God to come and punish the evil people, and when it did not happen, they said there is no God. And what have we done? Did we pray enough? And did we say the right prayers? So there are a number of poems like that. Although on the long poem about protest against God that my dad has near the end of the book, he basically challenges God, do you exist, and so on. But then God answers, which is interesting, so that maybe he was not an atheist after all, although I don't think he believed in the afterlife. In addition, as I mentioned, there are about life in Aleppo, coming to the U.S., and culture shock for some of us. Excuse me. So we'll go on. We went on a trip let me talk about this first. This is my father's family. The guy with the fez is my grandfather, Gregory Ketabgian. The lady with the nice hairdo is my grandmother, Anna. Next to her is Ranush, the daughter who died on the way. My dad is the one on the right of the picture sitting with the casket, and then the other one is Uncle Parsef on the extreme right, and the baby in maternal grandmother's lap is my second uncle, Uncle Hayek. So that basically is the thing. There was another child. This was a picture taken in 1909. Was mailed to all the cousins throughout, which was the custom at that time, once a year to have a family portrait. And this one landed in Damascus, where a cousin named Parsef Odabashian lived, because all the other pictures were obviously lost during the genocide. And when we went to get our visa from the U.S. Embassy in Damascus, we visited Odabashian, and he dug this up. And we were fortunate to have it, because that's the only picture we have before the genocide. This is a slightly enlarged form. My dad mentions a large fountain near them where, after they arrested my grandfather to take him to jail, was standing here with other men. This is the church, of course, in Kayseri, and this is the inside. It's actually a beautiful church with 3 altars. Now, this is the picture of the first group of men who were arrested, taken to jail, and the Turkish government took pictures of them to document that they were doing their job, to send it to Constantinople to show it to the big shots there. And I got this from Steve Kirkjian, who gave a talk about this picture. He's been doing additional research who these people were. Eventually, he dug up in a newspaper after the genocide that had a lot of the names written down in Armenian. Unfortunately, when the book we sent it to be published, did not have the inscription underneath. I just have the picture there. But he has done an amazing work of research on that. Now this is the map of the genocide. Let's see if I can Kayseri is here. They came down to Bozanti. In the book, there is a description of why they took the animals away and they dropped the load there. It's the pass between the inland and the Mediterranean coast of the Taurus Mountains, going to Adana. Then they went to Osmaniye, Islahiye, then Katma, which was the most terrible camp ever. It outdid the German camps. And then they went to Bab, and then to Aleppo. They wouldn't let them in, so they went to Seville. There was a lot of talk about Seville because it was actually, for us, a garden with a fountain in it and a pond, and I have quite a bit of writing about that as kids. Then they ran away and hid in Tefriye, which he calls Tetif. And then Meskene was the beginning of the desert all the way to Deir Zor. And that's where his brother died, and later Abu Harar, where his sister died of disease and malnutrition. Then they went to Raqqa. Then they were sent to Sepka. Then they passed by Deir Zor a number of times, and then they were sent to Marat, and then back to Deir Zor. There's this little, I'm going to read just a little part from that later about that. So that's how it was until 1919. So that, having left Kayseri in 1919, August 16th, they got to Aleppo in 1919, so there were 4 years. So they took them two years, I believe, 2 months in on the road, and they worked in Deir Zor as goldsmiths and silversmiths for about 19 months. Then they found out that they had a cousin, Nazar, living in Aleppo. So he said, come here because life is easier here. It's a bigger city. So they went there. And did not leave Aleppo until myself 1954, and my dad didn't leave until 57 to come to the U.S. Let's see. Oh, this is a map that I found recently where now they have built a dam. You can see, I'm seeing the pointer here. But it's up there. The dam is here, over here. So they created a lake, and so that submerged Meskene and Abu Harar in the lake. So that those two towns disappeared, including, of course, the 2 burial spots of our family. This is Katma, the railroad station. This is a true photograph of Aleppo within the town, how the refugees were trying to survive. This is a little, what shall I say, place where the Armenians built homes with metal roofs in Aleppo. And in the distance, I believe you see the railroad station of Aleppo, if those who are familiar with it. It is Aleppo with its famous citadel, and most of the things this is in 1920, the buildings were flat roof where people slept at night on the roof in the summer. Now this is the family, extended family included that survived and came to Aleppo in 1919. The fellow in the center is my grandfather again, with my grandma on his right. And right behind him with the larger mustache is my dad. The other family, the uncle was killed outside Kayseri. I won't tell how my grandfather survived. It's in the book. And the other members of that family. Nazar, the guy on the extreme right, shorter fellow, was the one who they were in Aleppo and became my dad's partner in Aleppo with all his attempts to make a living. Here there are 4 cousins from the Matosian side, maternal side, at Sebil, where the only greenery and water that we saw. Otherwise, Aleppo was a very dry city. And here there are some pine trees and the famous bicycle I've written about, where we tried to learn how to ride a bike at the parking lot of the Sebil Garden. This is on a hike in the Lebanon mountains. We used to go there once in a while for the summer because Aleppo was terribly hot, dry, and dusty. And this was in an apple orchard of a Christian Arab who we were going to a monastery, but it was so long that we got tired and we sat down to have a picnic lunch. But the man came around and we thought he was going to get mad at us, but instead he really liked my sister Armenian, who's sitting here on the second row and living at his residence. This Armenian beauty. So he wanted her to become his son's bride, sight unseen almost. And he said, and see all these apple orchards? Those all will be hers. Well, the fellow on the right of the picture in the distance is my uncle. I think my dad wasn't there. He said, well, you know, I have to really talk to her father. I'm not the father. So that's how we got out of it. And on the way back, we sort of hurried to get away from him before he grabbed us again. So now this is about the only piece of their work, silverware. This is a snuff box, silver. Of course, it's darkened with enamel stuff on it. That my dad used to say that they were top goldsmiths and silversmiths, my grandpa and the 2 brothers. But a lot of it was lost because they couldn't take it with them. And my dad was 17 years old, the only person in charge because all 3 uncles were jailed. I mean, his father and the 2 uncles, I should say. So he had to make the decision, so he didn't know what to do with all the gold, silver, and he said we also had a lot of antiques. They couldn't take it with them. So in the basement, the walls were built with 2 stone walls with a mortar in the center of Kayseri homes. So he pulled out some of the stones and stuck this antiques inside and then covered it up again. But then in 1919, when they came to Aleppo, they needed principal to start their business. So he decides to go back to Kayseri, which was a risky business at the time. He takes the chance and goes to, because he knows that there was a lot of material there, and if he could pick it back up, there would be good principle for him to start a business. Unfortunately, he said when Turks were living in it, so he asked for the key. In 3 days, they get rid of whoever was living there, they give him the key. Goes in, he goes into the basement, the first thing is in the book. He said, as soon as I went down, I saw these little stones that were in between the bigger stones on the ground. he knew that they had found all the treasure. So he says, I went there for nothing. Then he goes to the barber shop trying to find out what the politics was, because they were still considering to move back to Kayseri to live, because at that time they had heard that the French were going to have a mandate because they had occupied part of the Mediterranean coast. As soon as the barber sees him, recognizes him, of course, he says, what are you doing here? Get out, because they find you, they're going to kill you. The Kayseri, Kayseri, the Turks were terrible to the population during this time. So this is the only thing that I have that I'm aware of that saved from Kayseri. Now this is what we call filigree. It's a candy dish. Now this is made by my uncle Parsef in his silversmith shop, where every little piece that you see is glued together with a little flame through a little pipe that they blow on it to melt the silver so that it'll stick. I used to watch them work on it. I don't know how many weeks it takes to make something like this, but it's an amazing piece of work. Oops, sorry. This is from my father's carving after he came here, and then he got somewhat depressed because he missed all his friends and his work back home, although he wanted to be with our family. And he started carving a lot of stuff. Those from Knights of Varta and Everyone's Lodge, I think, would recognize this because you have a replica of this. You still use it at your dies. This is a collection of stamps from my cousin in Armenia, because one of my uncles decided to immigrate to Armenia, repatriate there. And he is an amazing stamp collector and an authority on it. This has to do about the stamps used during a brief time when Cilicia, Gilicia, it says Cilicia on some of them, was under French rule, and then later on down below where it says Hatay, when the Turks took over the Alexandrat Sanjak over, and those were the early stamps from that. So this is sort of history stamps for that period of time, for that portion of the country. Okay, now who is this fellow? Of course, his name is written there. I promised to tell you about him because how many has seen the movie America, America? I just wanted to know. Not too many. Okay. How many would like to see it? Not today, of course. Yeah. It's something that I think it's a worthwhile event, by the way, Maggie, to do and have maybe cinematologists go over it, because I think it's a classic. And if we watch it, we have it on our DVR, and we watch Alice and I again to refresh it. It's an amazing, amazing movie. And in it, the announcer says it's a great movie. It had like 8 Oscar nominations. I think it won 1 or 2 for the director, and I did camera work. But he said, I don't know why it's not more popular. Well, nothing having to do with Armenian Genocide. It's that popular outside the Armenian circles, except for people who are running the Carl Jr. down on Hollywood Boulevard on April 24th. His bathroom was overloaded. Okay. Elia Kazan was born in Constantinople from a family, a Greek family. Actually, his real name was Elias Kazanjoğlu. And he changed it, of course, to Elia Kazan when he came to the U.S. So, of course, he was 5 years old, but his father changed it. they came. Actually, the movie is based on his uncle's life experiences. Because it has to do with the young man with a burning desire to come to America, just trying to get away from that, what we would call hellhole that inland Turkey was. He's well known, of course, for other movies. One of my other favorites is Streetcar Named Desire, On the Waterfront, and East of Eden. Excuse me. The movie America starts with the main character, Stavros, and his Armenian friend Vartan cutting ice from the ice fields on Mount Aegeus. I showed you the pictures. Similar to my father, who had told us the same that he had done with his uncle. And they used to bring it, because they used to have a home in Talas, which was higher altitude than Kayseri. It was much cooler for a summer residence, and they would put it in the basement, cover it with hay, and then use it to cool their lemonade. But in the movie, it shows the Armenians being killed. It shows the priest spitting on the face of a Turkish gendarme who was trying to set fire to his beard. Of course, they killed him, and then the Armenians congregating in the church, and then they are setting it on fire, of course. But people were living in constant fear all the time, and he used to see his parents, whenever they were talking, would talk in whisper in case somebody's listening outside. He would close their windows and the door, so they were in fear. I'm just going to read a couple of brief notes from here, what he had said in his memoir. My father's family comes from the interior of Asia Minor, from a city called Kayseri. They never forgot that they were part of a minority. They were surrounded with periodic slaughter or riots. The Turks would suddenly have a crisis and massacre a lot of Armenians. One of the first memories I have is I'm sleeping in my grandmother's bed, and my grandmother telling me stories about the massacre of the Armenians and how she and my grandfather hid Armenians in the cellar of their homes. Armenians were lustier. Their history is much bolder, more rebellious one. The Greeks were crafty. They did not rebel, and they did not get killed as much. That's why he makes an amazing thing about something called an Anatolian smile. An Anatolian smile is an artificial smile in the face of disaster. Like the man comes, the Turk comes, he says, I'm going to buy what you have for half the price, or below what it costs you. So the Greek guy smiles and says, of course, Effendi, please, be my guest, and he's smiling. So actually there is a place where the Turk says, why are you smiling at me? It's a disastrous thing, but they smile. He couldn't take that character in the movie because he says, he was rebellious like the Armenians. So the other thing he mentioned, which is also in the movie, the Turks would spit on the Armenians and the Turks, because they treat them like minor citizens, lower class. The Greeks would say, is it raining? When they spit. But the Armenians spit it back. Then has to do with Erciyes the Mound is another shot of it. And he says that his father, this is a true story, was dying of pneumonia. This is now in New York City. And he wanted to go back to Kayseri. Impossible. He's on oxygen. He's just last few days of pneumonia. And he realized that he cannot be taken back, So he goes back to his bedroom, see if he can find something he can take so he'll feel more at home. The only picture he finds is, he says, then I saw the photograph, the only picture on his wall. The subject was Mount Archeos, the great symmetrical mountain that stands over my father's town in Anatolia. My grandmother never stopped telling me about it, the way the water from the snow top ran down the mountainside all summer long. The orchards of fruit, the picnic places, the summer villas on the slopes. My grandmother had always claimed that this, not Ararat, was the mountain where Noah had landed his ark. Here it was, now the magnet of whatever longing my father still had aching within him, the one image of love on the old man's wall. They had left that country to find a better place to live, and all they had found was a better place to make money. He didn't think very long of their situation, because they were in the rug business, like a lot of the Armenians. They got very wealthy, they had big homes, cars, and so on, but the stock crash of 1929, they lost everything. Okay. Since we go only in the summers to Kayseri, I thought I would show you a picture from the winter in Kayseri, which is an impressive shot. Mr. Zernajian did not make it yet. He was ill, he told me. He's also lived in Kayseri part of his life, and he has sent me this picture through another friend of his. So don't blame me for not being it copyrighted. Okay. Well, the thing that I was going to do some reading, but I think that I've done enough here so that I will not do it unless you have a great desire to hear me talk further. I just wanted to say that we all have a responsibility to preserve our family history, no matter how unimportant or trivial or repetitious it may seem to us. We have to get our message across to the next generations that our story is not of failure, but of success and survival. It's a transgenerational self-image we have to create, and that should energize them further. If we fail to do that, we would have broken the chain of continuity. If we don't say what we know or what our fathers have told us, the chain is broken. Then what are they going to depend on to go on to their story? We should not fail in doing our task. It's our responsibility. So now the bus is leaving Kayseri, and thank you for coming. Any burning questions? Or did I answer everything? Okay. Is there somebody? Okay, that's Amen.
Yes, Bekanahadentes, Horovidev, Michevasor, Michevasbagan, Anon Forum Terraspam, Chanshusham, Hazana Dasmigia, and Shuch was for Terraspam Tunek, Tarabes, Lagan Parere, Yevoperi Parere, or Naki Hamad, Yep Turk, Huina, the Hosi. Եվ ժպտելով գարհամարե թուրքը եւ միշտ մնացած բաները որ պատմեցի, ինձ համար շատ քնահատելի եղավ։ Շնորհակալ եմ։ Yes, when your father went back to Kayseri to his house, didn't you say your father went back?
Yes, he went back, yes.
Yeah, how come they let him go inside his house?
Well, this was in 1919. Just war had ended, but the Turkish government had not gotten organized. And the Turks were really afraid at that time, of course from the Allies, but also from the Armenians who were returning, that they were going to come and, take vengeance. And my dad mentions a little bit that this did take place in certain regions. So there was no government, basically. except the part that the French took over, which was Cilicia, but Kayseri is outside that region. There were no French occupation there. And that was the basic problem, that both the British and French did not have the power, did not commit the power, military force, to really occupy the whole country. Okay? And this is what took place. Then, of course, Atatürk, Kemal person, came from up north and tried to organize and got the Turks back into energy. And of course, he had all these understandings that he lined up with the French and British, as well as the Italians. They gave him ammunition and a lot of guns to be able to fight, because at that time the Greeks were attacking from Smyrna into the middle of Turkey, but he had to beat them back. And nobody helped the Greeks to take over at least part of Western Turkey, unfortunately. So there was no government he was able to enter, but you know, so there was free for all, basically.
I want to say thank you to Dr. Ketabgian. This is his 4th lecture at the Ararat-Eskijian Museum. Each time he comes out with a different subject. And I forgot to say that also in his book, he talks about my step-grandfather's uncle, who was one of the 12 who was individuals who was hanged in Kayseri. And he was hanged 3 times, not twice, 3 times. But I will tell you more about the books, which he'll be signing shortly. Dr. Ketabgian, if you could come over, we have something very small to give you for all your contributions to Ararat-Eskijian Museum, your direction, your encouragement, your support. Thank you for keeping the Armenian dream alive through your vision and lectures. Ararat-Eskijian Museum, this is a small replica of Mother Armenia. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. I think you deserve this more than I do. She is an amazing force, and a magnet, and it's amazing what can be done with just interest. Concerning your granduncle, the 2 times they were hanging him, the rope broke, so 3rd time they used a wire.
I have to do this beginning of the presentation. Unfortunately, the individual didn't come on time. Harry Ketabgian, would you please come in? Harry has been a volunteer at the museum for the last 8 years. Rain and sunshine, he helps me out on Saturdays. And thank you for his wife, Silva, for supporting him. And we have something very small to give you. Thank you. And the book that we're going to give him is by the Dr. Demoyan, Armenian Genocide, front page coverage in the World Press. Thank you, Harry. So for those of you who would like to support and help the museum in volunteer ways, we appreciate your support. Thanks, Harry. You were a little bit late today. Well, it's the end of the program, so don't forget to come on June the 4th. Mr. Gregory will be our speaker. We do have a book signing, and we do have a reception. Sumptuous food from Alice Ketabgian. Thank you.